Good morning. This is a Successful Funding Show, and I'm Carl Dakin. I refer to myself as the Capital Coach because I try to help people raise funding from all kinds of businesses, community projects, government programs, and charities. And today we're going to be talking about the concept of fans as they relate to sports, and we're going to be focusing particularly on youth sports today. And with me, I have Michael Feely, who's been a guest on the show in the past, and who is one of the few people I know who actually holds degrees in sports management, and therefore that makes him smarter than most everybody else on this topic. But Michael, welcome to the show today, and look forward to our discussion.
Thanks for having me. I do joke sometimes that actually I went to school for a kickabout, so I don't know how much smarter that makes me than everyone else, but hopefully I can add some insight.
Great. So we're seeing a problem in the youth sports in the United States, and it isn't necessarily limited to the United States, but we have more understanding because we've been studying this problem quite a bit. But a report came out from the Aspen Institute that said that the parents of children who are participating in sports are taking on an ever increasing burden, meaning that they are paying more and more and more of the total cost of their kid participating in sports. And the cost is going up. The report stated that costs have gone up 45% over the last 5 years. And the result of that is that fewer kids are participating in sports because they can't afford it. Their parents can't get there from here with their income. And so this is a situation where it's contrary to everything everybody wants to do. I mean, almost everybody will agree with you that a child participation in sports is a good thing. It's good for the child from a health standpoint, from learning leadership, social interaction, the list goes on and on. And to see a trend taking place where fewer kids are participating in sports is actually a fairly important issue of the day. And so with that, then the question becomes, well, if the parents of the kids are not going to pay for the participation in sports or can't afford it, who else can and will be willing to pay for that? And how does that happen? And that brings us to today's topic, which is fans. Fan is short for fanatic. It represents someone who follows a sport or a team or a group or a band or anything else. And we're not talking about Swifties today because we're talking about sports. But same thing. A sports team wants to have lots and lots of fans who come to the games, who buy concessions at the games, who buy merchandise, who basically make the team part of their life. And in the vernacular of what we're talking about, this is called fan engagement. This is where there's a relationship between the fan and the team, such as it is. And what we've seen is that fans ultimately pay for everything if a system is working correctly, meaning that by the time the fan buys the tickets, concessions, merchandise, it puts money in the pocket of the team. The team then can pay for the cost of its players. If it's a pro player, it includes their salary compensation. If it's an amateur player, we're looking at uniforms, kit, and equipment. We're looking at insurance. We're looking at travel. And these are all the direct expenses before we get into the indirect expenses, where parents commonly volunteer huge chunks of their time to help in the administration, organization, and coordination of the team. So with that, Michael, talk to us more about what is a fan, what causes a fan to become a fan, and how do we encourage, engage, entice someone to become a fan?
Really, I mean, as simplistically as possible, a fan is anyone that is paying attention for whatever reason, and B, willing to spend money as a result of doing so to demonstrate the fact that they're paying attention or supporting. I've sort of looked at this before. We've done some research where we sort of break this down by stakeholders. So it could be participants, it could be parents, friends and family of participants, could be sponsors, vendors, customers and employees of sponsors and vendors, and so on and so forth. But really, when you want to be more specific about engagement, I've tried to break it down into 4 sort of levels or layers. So those that are actively involved, passively involved, actively interested, and passively interested. So, for example, like I'm wearing an Aurora Barbarians t-shirt. I used to coach the women's team there in Toronto, or just north of Toronto in Ontario. Excuse me. I was actively interested because I was the coach. I'm now passively interested because I was a coach. I was also actively involved at one point because I was with the team, but passively involved in terms of I had influence or involvement in terms of say like the youth development program, because that fed into our senior program. So I'm a fan in all of those sections, or segments, but my level of engagement varies by my role or responsibility, or by the participant group. So if you're a kid that's playing sport, you're actively involved. If you're a parent of that kid, you're passively involved. You could be actively involved if you're running fundraisers, volunteering as a coach, sponsoring, so on and so forth. If you sort of extend those relationships further afield, could be a grandparent that lives in a different state. Okay, now you're not really engaging online. You're not going to the games. You're not buying merchandise or concessions or anything like that. So you could be passively interested or actively interested if you are sort of following online and so on. It all really depends on sort of your proximity to the game on the field, to be honest with you. And the same applies really with professional sports or grassroots. It's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, as they say. How close are you to that relationship, to the performer? And the performer is simply the person on the pitch competing in the match. And then back to what you were saying about in terms of fans pay for everything. It really is simple, but where do professional sports teams get their money from? They get it from fans and / or corporations. Where do the corporations get their money from? Fans. So, for example, Chelsea Football Club, they have a kit deal with Nike. Fans pay tickets, pay for tickets, membership, season tickets, concessions, buy merchandise, but that merchandise is sold via Nike. So then Nike offers Chelsea money up front as a sort of investment to say, well, here's a down payment. We're going to collect revenue elsewhere once we start selling the jerseys. Ultimately, it all comes from the fans. It's the same if you look at broadcast and say the NFL and Fox Sports or someone like that. Ultimately, it's you or I having a cable subscription. And the same is true for Amazon or Apple, YouTube, whoever's all involved now with these big streaming platforms, that they're paying money up front as an investment or down payment on the money they're going to collect from the consumer directly. So partly it's B2C and partly it's B2B, but pro sports ultimately gets all of their revenue from fans. It just depends if there's a middleman in there or not. And the same is with concessions and Bud Light having a deal at a stadium or someone like that. It's all us. It's the everyday man.
Yeah. So
or woman.
Let's take as an example. We have a soccer team, that is comprised of 20 10-year-olds. And this is an amateur team. They're playing soccer as best they can. And obviously, as you described it, the fans of these kids playing are going to include their parents and some of the relatives and things like that. And a lot of these teams, when they go out for funding, though, it's kind of pass the hat. It's like go to all the parents, ask them to chip in money, or the parents put on a fundraiser, as we all know, where they do a bake sale and they sell cakes to each other, which means that they're dipping into the same bucket of money over and again. And some have gone beyond that, where they seek money from local businesses. So, Michael, could you speak to how it's commonly done and how that might be improved in terms of getting more money into a team from sponsors, and how that applies in more detail to fandom?
Well, there's a blunt way to say it that I won't share, but basically it's just give us your money, thanks very much. People treat sponsorship as a donation. It's not. It's a marketing expense, and Pro Sports understands this. Real quick, just sort of a professional team understands that they're both a retailer and a wholesaler. They retail products to the consumers in the stadium, for example, tickets, concessions, merchandise, but then they wholesale eyeballs to people. Chelsea wholesales eyeballs to someone like Nike, so that Nike can then retail the products, and so the cycle continues. But they understand that in that relationship, it's a marketing expense, and that there has to be a return on investment. Most people will typically just hold their hand out and say, give us money. It's a donation. We're a non-profit. You should give us money. Well, there's lots of charities, and probably better causes, whether it's like kids with cancer or animal shelters or stuff like that those people truly are needy. I've got options as a business owner to say, well, there's a better cause than just paying for your hobby. And that's true of adult clubs as well as youth clubs. It's ultimately that they're treating it as a donation, not a marketing expense. And frankly, either way is tax deductible for the business, because marketing is an expense. One gets you nothing or very little, and one gets you a return in terms of more eyeballs, more awareness of your brand, of your product, of your business, which in turn is supposed to lead to more revenue because of sales. Really, that means that once the check clears, it's not the end of the relationship. That's just the beginning. And youth teams in particular need to do a much better job of promoting their sponsors, their relationships, but also so do the sponsors. If you're giving money to a good cause and you're supporting it in such a way, that's something that you should be proud of, and that's something that you should be, shouting from the rooftops, because that in turn drives more awareness or engenders greater brand loyalty. So, for example, when we ran a pilot program in Englewood, one of the restaurants that sponsored us, we made sure that they did a good job of telling their existing customers how they were supporting community youth programs. That differentiates them from the other restaurant up the street, saying, well, look, we're not just after your money. We're invested in this community. Our business is here. Our lives are here. And we care about your kids. That should in turn lead to more loyalty, which in turn leads to more sales and revenue and so on. You can repeat the cycle, and there's a return on investment because they've got margins built in on the products that they're selling or the service that they're providing. So it's not just the youth programs or sports programs for adults, but really the sponsor has to take on responsibility to ensure that they're assisting in the delivery of that return of investment.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that when you talk to a business about helping out a local youth team, they all view it as a donation, something that's money that in some ways they're giving away for a good cause. But as a gift, as a charitable contribution, there's no expectation that they're getting any value back from that. And it was interesting as we worked with local businesses to say, hey, what do you get from your advertising? Setting this team aside, this youth sports program aside for a moment, what do you expect to get from your advertising? What kind of advertising are you doing? How are you promoting your business? What are you paying for it? And they would tell us, well, we bought an ad in the Yellow Pages back when we had Yellow Pages. We put up a website. We may have different promotional events that take place through the year to call attention to us. And you're saying, so basically, when you do advertising, you're pointing at yourself, you're letting people know you exist, you're trying to communicate to them that you are a choice and maybe a superior choice. These are all common things that you try to do with advertising. Why don't you do the same thing when you sponsor a local youth team? Because not only are you a business, as Michael described it, that has a product or service, but you're helping your community by sponsoring this particular youth team. That's good for all the athletes on the team, all the families. It's good for the community. All the things we talk about that come from youth sports can all be realized. And a lot of these businesses have never looked at it that way. They never thought that they needed to tell their customers, their networks, their social media, that they were in fact supporting this particular youth sports program. And it elevates them, as Michael described it, because of one business is supporting youth sports and another one's not. Everyone who identifies as a fan with youth sports is going to think that this one business is superior as a consequence of what they're doing to help out. So it gets interesting to see how businesses can take their existing advertising promotional budget. They can look at supporting youth sports and can justify spending more to support that team because they're getting value back from it through their advertising. And the advertising is technically going to a fan. This is what we've been talking about, is that fans ultimately pay for everything. And so when a business takes their brand and associates it with the brand of the team, the youth sports program, whatever it happens to be, they're telling the world that they endorse and support that team, but that in turn means that everyone who likes that team, that's a fan of the team, is now associating the business with the team. Yep. And that gives them a reason to buy the products and services of that particular company. Now, we've all seen advertisements on TV during a pro game, NFL game. You'll see car advertisements, you'll see clothing advertisements, and all these people want to be associated with the fans of that professional team. But this works all the way down to first grade, entry-level sports programs. Even a small 20-person team playing any particular sport will have a number of people that are aware it exists, wanted to succeed, want the kids to benefit from it. And a business can align themselves with that team in a way that's good for their own self-interest, their own promotional efforts. And by doing that, now we've taken, in effect, the fans of the business and we've merged them with the fans of the team. And we now have a super fandom where they have two different reasons for participation in any particular event, for buying a particular product or service and moving things forward. And this very basic concept, though, of fan-centric operation of a sports program opens the door to all kinds of sponsorship in much, much larger dollar amounts than they would ever raise from donations. And this is because the business is getting greater value where they're now paying advertising rates for their sponsorship of a team rather than making a donation, which comes out of a completely different bucket of money within the business. So, Michael, what can a business do to really accentuate this relationship, to tell the world about it in a way that makes this a worthwhile advertising expenditure instead of a charitable donation?
Well, I mean, really, you have like, what's the point of marketing or advertising, right? It's to elicit an emotional response that leads to an action, aka buying the product. There's a number of ways that happens, and you see it with the Super Bowl, for example, and all the different commercials at halftime. A lot of people just watch the Super Bowl to watch the commercials. I know that's my mum does if she's ever awake to watch it, but it's about communicating that relationship and making sure that you're identifying the emotional response that you want from it. So, because that leads to the action in terms of buying more product. So you have to tell your customers that that's occurring. You have to tell the sponsored team and the fans of that team that that's occurring. And you know, it's kind of a sort of irrational decision making in terms of the fan or the customer, but that's because it's emotional. So, you know, I sort of think about like laundry basket loyalty. If you're doing something for the mum that is supporting her kid who she's emotionally invested in, and she sees that because she's washing the jersey every day or every other day and it's got your logo on it, that's subliminally building that relationship and creating that emotional response or pathway. So, you know, if I'm selling a product or you're selling a product and my logo's on the jersey, at some point, who's she more likely to go and think, oh, I need to get such and such a product. Who am I going to get it from? Oh, I'm going to get it from this company because she's already emotionally invested.
Yeah, yeah. The business is helping her kid, so they are an ally.
Yeah.
And to the extent that the parent understands that the sponsorship is reducing the cost for her kid to participate in sport, then there's every reason why she would become a customer, a patron of that particular business. She could choose amongst all the businesses. She could go online, buy from certain large companies online, or she can buy from this business because it's helping her kid. And when you can create that alignment, that what I call commonality of brand, then she becomes a fan of the business because the business is supporting her kid. And that's what sponsorship really is all about at its basics. But it's not limited to pro sports. It's not limited to collegiate sports or just media on TV. It basically can occur at every level of play, every grade, amateur and pro. And getting those dollars in is critical to reducing the cost to the parent. So if a team is thinking of itself as its own little micro business, and it's saying, I've got to get all this kit and equipment, insurance, travel, all these expenses are going to be incurred for this group of kids to play in this season, then they have to then ask the question. They should ask the question. They don't necessarily do that. They should ask the question, well, who's going to pay for all this? It can't be assumed that it's going to be picked up by the school. It can't be assumed that it's being picked up by the local city. That's where a lot of the money used to come from, is a public education program or from a municipal youth program. And currently both of those are basically struggling to keep the money going forward. So the parents end up being the last person in line who has to pick up whatever cost is left. And it's just getting too expensive. So our interest in this is working with youth sports, helping them raise funding so that they get money in the form of not a donation, but I almost said it, a sponsorship, so that the parents don't have to be the person who writes the checks and get to a point they can't afford it any longer and they pull their kid out of sports. So getting a business to tell its own story, to pat itself on the back, sometimes some businesses I've talked to think that that's because they view it as a donation, that they shouldn't be talking about it. They should be more humble, greater humility, and so forth. And I'm kind of on the other end of that extreme. I would prefer them to pat themselves on the back and stand on a soapbox and tell the world what a great job they're doing of sponsoring a local team. So what does that look like, Michael? How do you get a business to kind of do a mindset, a reset, and start talking about themselves in a not so humble fashion?
I mean, that's part of the challenge, right? I mean, Freudian slip aside, sponsorship is not a donation, it is a marketing expense. And I can say that a million times, but it may not sink in. I think ultimately you have to remind the business owners that, look, business is no different from sport. It's a contest. You are in competition. And unlike youth sports, where everyone goes home at the end of the day and nothing really affects your life, in business, your livelihood is at stake. Your ability to pay the mortgage, put your kids through college, keep a roof over your head, put food on the table. Those things are all critically impacted by your ability to compete with the guy down the street. Unfortunately, a lot of people end up focusing on social media, Facebook and so on, but it becomes white noise. And the little mum and pop shop down the street, they're not going to be able to compete with these big corporations that have whole departments and $1 million budgets to manipulate the algorithm and those platforms to get the most eyeballs. So you have to find a different way to compete in the first place, and then you have to do a good job of letting people know that you're competing. And ultimately, I think part of the issue is that small businesses, if you're looking at the real grassroots levels, and they're the ideal candidates, local businesses sponsoring local teams, they don't do a good enough job of analysing their marketing strategies and their results in terms of social media and websites and traffic and so on, because they're just, at the end of the day, they're focusing on revenues and costs. They don't necessarily associate that the marketing is as critical as it should be, and they don't do a good enough job of analysing that. So it's hard to sort of offer or explain the right amount of value in that sense. But it ultimately comes down to you're in this to win. Your survival, your livelihood depends on it. So best get winning.
Yeah, so we've talked about eyeballs. This is a slang term for the number of people who see a particular name, the name of the team, the program in any particular time or place. And this again gets into rethinking sponsorship at the team level. A lot of businesses I've seen get all excited when they can put their name on the jersey of the child that's going to play in the sport. And part of the challenge here is how many people are actually going to see that name on that jersey. If you have a group of 10-year-olds playing soccer, rugby, lacrosse, or whatever, the only people that may see the names on the jerseys may be the parents on both the team of the player and on the opposing team. You could be talking less than 20, 30, 40, 50 people get to see the name on the jersey. And so the eyeball count is 50 50 sets of eyeballs per game in an 8-game season, you're just not getting that much visibility. And that's why a lot of businesses look upon this as a donation rather than a true sponsorship. That if they change this around and they then engage all their customers in their association with this team, now every one of their customers becomes another set of eyeballs that gets to see this association. And it's not necessarily limited anymore to just the logo on the team jersey. It now includes mention on their website. It could be on their product or service flyer. It could be out of any event that they do where they go, we're a proud sponsor of XYZ team, and all their customers see that every time they put out any kind of communication at any level. And then it can expand beyond that to the public. So there may be somebody that's in the public that loves sport, wants to support youth sports, but they may never buy a particular product or service from this company. It's not something that's on their shopping cart list. But they still will appreciate that business. They'll see this business and hold it in higher esteem. So maybe they'll talk about it. But this is where creative sponsorship needs to go forward, is how do you get a business to talk about itself in a way that one generates more customers, because that's the competitive edge Michael's talking about. A business needs customers, it needs to keep customers, it needs to grow customers. And part of the way of doing that is telling the public that you're a good citizen, you're supporting a local youth sports team, and letting them know that. So that when they do need to make a purchasing decision and they have a choice amongst different vendors, they can go, I'm going to pick this merchant because they're supporting youth sports. If for no other reason, because it may be the tipping point on whether they choose one vendor or another, or they may recognize the name of the business because it was in the news, it was, something was done on social media, and they're going, I remember that business, I need to go buy something, I'll go to that business. And it's just no more than a memory thing, even if they're not associating all the positives of youth sports, it's still there in their head, and it's helping that business compete. And so when a lot of times you'll see businesses buying advertising, buying words on the internet, all kinds of different things, and you're going, what value are you getting out of that? And most businesses can't give you a good answer. They really don't know. They're kind of shotgunning, letting everybody know they're spending money in places with people who never buy a product or service, because that's what they've been told to do by someone who thinks that spamming the world is the only way to engage in marketing. So what can a business do, Michael, to basically get better bang for their buck by sponsoring a youth team over other forms of advertising? How would they compare and contrast other forms of advertising with sponsorship?
Well, it comes back to the whole idea of eliciting an emotional response. So even though someone in the community might not care about that youth team or the kids on it, or particularly the business within that community, they do care about their community. So, not all eyeballs are created equally. It's being specific, targeting your demographic, your market in your area. And I liken social media to like being in a nightclub and everyone's yelling, right? And so if you just start yelling as well, it becomes part of the white noise. And really the best thing that you can do is sort of walk up to that person, tap them on the shoulder and scream in their ear instead. But you're now speaking specifically to that person. And if you're speaking to them in a manner that you can touch on subjects or topics that they care about, you're going to elicit an emotional response, and that will lead to the action that you want, hopefully, down the road. It might not be immediate, but it's more targeted, it's more personal. You're building a relationship, and also, like you think about with parents constantly paying more and more and more for sport. It's because that program has a relationship with the parents, and they have that relationship to such an extent that they've sold them something, and it's easier to sell someone something a second time or a second thing later on, because you've already got that relationship established. You don't have to go out and find new customers. You don't have to go out and build a relationship with those customers, find out what their wants and needs are. You've already established that. You've demonstrated that you can deliver something that makes them feel good. It could be their kid playing sport, but it ultimately makes it easier to go and challenge the same pockets again and again and again. And really, sort of, businesses need to think about that, in the sense that if we are doing something within the community for our customers, directly or indirectly, we've got the ability to go and challenge that pocket again, get them to purchase something, because we've already established a relationship. We've built that emotional connection, and we're eliciting an action or response that we want, which leads to more sales. So it just comes down to, if not all eyeballs are created equally, you have to identify what the eyeballs want, and how much they want it and care about it, and how many times are they going to repeatedly purchase that thing. So be specific, be targeted, be clear about what you're doing, how you're helping, how that benefits the customer beyond just the purchase of this product or service that you're selling. I think, like, communicate directly with these people and about things that they care about. It's social media, like I said, it's white noise. You're yelling into a nightclub. No one can hear you anyway.
Yeah, so it appears that a couple things need to happen here if we're going to step beyond a single team to all youth sport. Try to help them engage fans, build fans, and do this in a way that helps the people who are sponsoring them. You'll hear, if you're at a conference or somewhere, they'll have the names of the sponsors on the screen behind you. They'll have the platinum, silver, gold sponsors, and each of those represents a level of funding that's been brought to that particular event. And the person who stands up on stage, who's the running the show, will say, "Oh, I want to stop before or after," but they'll stop at some point. "I'd like to thank our sponsors. I'd like to call attention to them," even though their name has been hanging up there on the projection for the entire conference, or it shows up at different points in time. What it's doing is that you're calling attention to the sponsors, calling them out. It's rare to see youth sports teams doing a good job of that. When they have an announcement going out to the parents saying, "Hey, this is where you need to be on Saturday for our early game," there's not a reference to the sponsors. The sponsors are not getting the attention, the recognition, the promotion that they could do. And these are things that need to be adopted, integrated into what the team is doing. And then on the other side of the equation, we have the sponsors who need to do a better job of telling the world. If they're sending out a flyer, if they're putting a menu in front of you at the local restaurant, there should be some mention of the fact that they're supporting the team. But it needs to be more active in that, where they're going, "We support the 10th grade, the 10-year-old Blue Jay soccer team, and They won this week. They played the Raptors over from the neighboring community, and our team won. Or our team lost this week. We're sorry. We hope they do better next week. But this is sharing information back and forth with their fan base, the fan base of the business, and trying to get them to also become fans of the sports team. And there's different things that the business can do to try to improve that specific type of engagement. But, these are skills. This is a little bit of infrastructure, a little bit of administration that needs to be done both on behalf of the team in its fundraising efforts to give greater value, which justifies more money from the sponsor. And at the same time, the sponsor needs to do a better job of taking credit for what they're doing so they get greater value from it by repeating this information to their customers, to the public. And if the team's not giving the sponsor the information, then neither one of them can really do anything with that. It becomes very static, very flat. And as Mike would say, the emotion kind of disappears, and everybody's making purely logical, rational decisions, which tend to be price oriented.
Yep.
Rather than the other way around. So, Michael, what would you suggest to a business who wants to improve their game to make them a better sponsor and gain more value from what they're doing?
First of all, apologies for getting up and walking around. I had to let my geriatric Great Dane out. He was ringing the doorbell to say he wanted to go out. I'd say to sponsors, to businesses, that don't sponsor teams unless they have a plan, unless they come to you with specific, SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, blah, blah, blah. If they don't have a plan or a strategy in place to help you, then really they're just saying, give us your money. We don't care about you. And that's not the basis for a strong relationship. You're supposed to care about each other. And the idea is that over time, that relationship strengthens, everyone benefits, the team gets more money potentially because the marketing has been successful and it's led to a return on investment, greater revenues, greater profits for the business. The business understands that and increases its contribution to support the team. If people don't have a plan, don't sponsor them. And I'll give you an example there, but I sponsored an organization and basically said, look, if you do this, and this, we're all going to be happy. And it didn't really work out that way. I sponsored them anyway against my better judgment. And exactly what I said would happen in terms of the negative outcomes did occur. And long story short, the day after the event, which cost me about $5,000, they posted on social media one post. Oh yeah, we forgot to thank our sponsors. Yeah. So as you can imagine, I was thrilled with the outcome of that sponsorship. And I knew it would go that way and there wasn't really much I could do about it, but I wouldn't do it again. They didn't have a plan. What little information they did provide wasn't really enough for us to promote anything. It was late in coming. There wasn't a communication schedule or strategy. And it was just a mess from the start. And like I said, against my better judgment, I sponsored them anyway because it was something that I was passionate about. But that's a one-way relationship. I'm passionate about it. They weren't passionate about my business and my success, just their own, and the need to cover their costs. And when it's that one-sided, it's never going to end well anyway.
Yeah, well, what you're pointing out there is that quite often when a business is interested in sponsoring a amateur sports team, that to some degree they need to retain enough control over the communications to assure that they do get the benefit that they're trying to get. So in this case, where they failed to acknowledge your company's sponsor, Michael, knowing or understanding or anticipating that they're going to drop the ball. I'm using all these sports references today, but nonetheless, what they're doing is you have to say, well, I want my name to be announced in this fashion. And can you do that? And if you can't, then I will take it upon myself to do the social media post, to put up the banner, to do the announcement, to do something along that line. And most sports groups will work with the business to accommodate that, to make that happen. They may not be able to plan it, they may not understand it, they may not be good at doing it, which is why in the relationship between the sponsor and the team, the business has to understand that sometimes maybe it's the grown-up in this relationship.
Yeah.
And it has to take on or assume responsibility for things that it would hope that the sports team would do on its own. But the sports team is not a professional business. It doesn't have an advertising department. It's got a lot of volunteers, and a lot of these volunteers are overstressed, and this may be completely outside the scope of what they know how to do. So in that particular situation, then the only thing you can do is say, well, ask the team, here's how I want to present myself to acknowledge my sponsorship. Can you do this for me? And you have to have a plan, as Michael described it, that gets down to that level of detail and says, well, if you don't do this or can't do this, then can I step in, and here's how I would do it. And have access, to posting on their social media page, or have access to the venue or whatever else is going on, where you are in control as the sponsor, and understanding that unfortunately, as much as you would like for the team to heap accolades on you as a sponsor, that may not be a skill set that they have, and you need to include that within the scope of what you define as a sponsor, because it's simply beyond their capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there, right? Professional. So the definition of professional is it's what you do for a living. So if you're a business owner, it's what you do for a living. And therefore, you're professional. And part of running a business is marketing, part of it's operations, part of it's the accounts and employment and training and so on. Whereas a youth sports or community sports organisation is largely volunteers, meaning they do something else for a living. Therefore, they're not a professional organisation in that sense. And I don't mean that critically. It's just definitionally. They do other things for a living. So it's going to take less of a priority. And ultimately, they're more focused on delivering good outcomes for the kids. Part of that is the affordability, but ultimately they focus on the pitch stuff, and more often than not winning or losing or being a good coach and so on. But good outcomes for the kids also involves delivering on certain things for sponsors and funders, but it's never really prioritized. And actually, if you focus on that, it makes everything else a lot easier, because more resources means more people to dedicate time and energy and professionality to the delivery of the program.
Right.
It all comes down to money. Money equals resources.
Well, and it comes down to a recognition that if you want to sponsor a youth team in your neighborhood, you may have to do almost everything in order to gain the value of that sponsorship. You may have to help them buy the jerseys. You may have to help them, set up the games. You may have to help them recruit a coach. You may have to run put a page on your website, which is the communication page for that local team. So they have a way of sharing information back and forth. These are all things that, as a business, it seems like it's a big reach. It's going to take on a lot of different things, and that's okay if you're getting the value back from it. So if you're a business and now everybody in the neighborhood knows that you're sponsoring this 10-year-old soccer team, then you've achieved one of your major objectives of making yourself identified as a community backer, a sponsor, a good person, white hat company of some kind. And if you tell all your customers, then they have a reason to stay with you, to choose you over the other. And if that means that you have to go out for every practice and set up a table to support the team, or you've got a tent at every game when they're playing in order to help tell the community who you are, build that into your model, do your cost analysis, and say, ask yourself, are you getting good value for being a sponsor? And some things maybe end up, not happening because it doesn't make any sense. But your ability to take advantage of an existing youth sports program and make it part of your overall brand, to make it part of how you tell your customers, how you tell the community who you are, that's an opportunity that every business should be looking at. And every business should adopt some amateur sports team, whether it's an adult club that's playing after college, or whether it's a high school, collegiate, or elementary, middle school team. It really makes sense for a business to consider building their fan base from the fans of the team and mixing them with the fan base, their customers of the business, and create this super crowd that loves both of you as much as each other.
Yeah, and sort of my final thought on that piece is that if you're trying to establish that relationship or strengthen that relationship with your customers and build loyalty, then you mentioned value, but in terms of the sponsorship, but in terms of the relationship with the customers, value isn't simply based on price. So what is your value proposition in the marketplace, and how are you defining that marketplace? If you're a local restaurant, your marketplace is a 10-mile radius, and you need to be strongest there than someone that's, an hour's drive away. Now, you might want to become a destination or such, but the reality is most of your business is going to come from within that radius. And so you should focus your efforts on the people within that geographic region and in ways that are meaningful to them, because that establishes a much stronger bond, brand loyalty and value proposition, other than, well, it's a little bit more expensive, but look at all the things they're doing.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to wrap up here because Michael and I both have some hard stops coming up at the end of the hour, and so we've talked about raising funding from almost two perspectives. We're raising funding into a sports team by setting up sponsorships, and understanding that the people who follow the team, who have a reason to be associated with that particular team, also are running a business as a sponsor, and they have their own customers. They have, in effect, their own fan base. And what we're talking about is trying to figure out how to bring these two together where both sides benefit. There's more money going into the sports team so that the parents don't have to carry the full burden of that. So that's a funding issue from a team standpoint. But the business now is generating a higher, stronger brand as a consequence of the fact that it's associated with a community program in the form of youth sports, which elevates them compared to all the other businesses that are not doing that. So we'll leave you with that. We'll be back next week. Michael and I are going to go through a series of additional funding issues related to sports and fandoms and so forth. So thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.